Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Adam Burke from BangTheBook.com, coming to you with a look here at the second round of the NBA playoffs. We already know two of the matchups, both of them in the Eastern Conference. We have a pretty good idea here of what we can expect with the Western Conference. So I'll talk about all four series here on this video. Over at BangTheBook.com, our writers putting together series previews for these four series. They'll also be doing game previews for each of the series, so you can check that out over at BangTheBook.com. Also, make sure you check out Parker Michaels' NHL work for the playoffs, including his second-round Eastern Conference playoff primer, which was just posted a little while ago, and his Western Conference one, which should be coming up here this evening. Also, you can check out my Major League Baseball work, my daily MLB picks and tips piece, which you can find every day over at BangTheBook.com. Then on Mondays and Thursdays, the Bettors Box, my MLB betting podcast, which you can find on Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and right here on our Bang the Book YouTube page. And also next week, we'll be doing a Kentucky Derby preview with Brian Blessing, and I'll have previews up over at BangTheBook.com of the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby. So definitely be on the lookout for that over at the website. All right, let's take a look here at the series previews for the second round. We start with the Eastern Conference, and we start with the number 4 seed Boston Celtics, plus 245 here against the Milwaukee Bucks, the number 1 seed with home court advantage, minus 290. I think the most important question about this series is, what are the Boston Celtics? Who are the Boston Celtics? They slept through the regular season. They did have some significant injury problems, but they finished up 49-33 by Pythagorean win-loss. They're actually a 52-30 team. But we don't really know what they are. You know, they swept Indiana right out of the playoffs in the first round. Didn't seem to have a whole lot of problems with that series. It felt like they just went through the motions in the regular season, trying to get to this point healthy. Well, now that they're here and now that they're healthy, what will they look like against the number 1 team in the Eastern Conference? And I think it's fair, really the overall number 1 seed here in the Milwaukee Bucks. I think it's fair to say that this could be the spot for the Milwaukee Bucks where they really missed Malcolm Brogdon. With Brogdon on the floor this year, they were plus 10.5 in net rating. Without Brogdon, they were plus 6.5. He's at least out for games 1 and 2, according to Mike Budenholzer's media availability today. So if I'm looking at this one from a betting standpoint, I think it's well within reach to take Boston plus 245 here at the open of this series. Without Brogdon at home, if Boston has a plan to slow down Giannis and also take care of the supplemental cast there, then Boston can very easily take a split in the first 2 games of this series. If that happens, and in particular, if they win game 1, you'll get a much better price on Milwaukee to hedge back with your plus 245 on Boston. I talked about this in the first round with the Brooklyn versus Philadelphia series. Brooklyn won game 1. You got a much lower price on Philadelphia for game 2. Similarly, I talked about it with the Orlando and Toronto series. Orlando happened to pull off game 1. Toronto was a much better price the rest of the way, and they won 4 straight to advance. So not to say that I think the Bucks are going to rattle off 4 straight and come back and win this series if they lose game 1 or if they split, but simply to say that I think there's line value in grabbing Boston plus 245 here. You get the Bucks, you know, they had the 3rd highest 3-point attempt rate in the NBA, but they were 14th in making them. Boston 9th in 3-point attempt rate, 7th in making them, and a pretty good defensive team guarding the 3-point line as well. So I think Boston has some clear-cut advantages in this series, and more importantly, the chance to get out in front or at least split on the road, turn into a best of 5 where they've got 3 home games. At that point, you'll have a better price to hedge back on the Bucks. So I think Boston plus 245 is worthwhile here to open up this series. They were better at taking care of the ball and better at forcing turnovers. Could get some extra possessions here in this series. I think that there's good value in taking the plus 245. They win game 1, you're sitting very pretty. If they don't, obviously you could have gotten a better price than plus 245. We'll see if they win game 2. But I think because game 1 is there for the taking, without Brogdon on the floor for the Bucks, I think that taking the Celtics before the series is a pretty good idea, then seeing if you can get a price that allows you to free roll the series or something like that on Milwaukee as we go throughout. The other series in the Eastern Conference here, the Sixers, they're plus 210 against the Toronto Raptors, who are minus 250. Both of these teams lost game 1, as I mentioned already, then went on to win 4 straight and advance. And it looks like Mike Scott could be out for at least the first couple of games in this series for Philadelphia. Big-time hit to their depth, in particular with their bench scoring, that could wind up being a pretty important factor here in this series because Toronto didn't get much from Kyle Lowry in the first round. And Toronto's never really gotten much from Kyle Lowry in the NBA playoffs. Kawhi Leonard did his thing, but Pascal Siakam and the rest of the supporting cast for Toronto came up very, very big in that series against Orlando. If that winds up being the situation here, where the starting lineups largely cancel each other out, well, Toronto may have a pretty big bench advantage with that injury to Scott here at the outset of this series. So that'll be something you want to keep in mind. And also, Joel Embiid is a much better player than Nikola Vucevic. I fully understand that. But the Raptors had a great game plan for Vucevic. They let Aaron Gordon do his thing, and he wasn't able to carry Orlando to more than one victory. They shut down the interior. If they do that in this series, Philadelphia is going to need some scoring options because Embiid is the most consistent and the best one that they have. So you sort of wonder here what Philadelphia is going to get offensively in this series against Toronto, who is a much, much better defensive team than Brooklyn. And quite frankly, that defensive edge for Toronto cannot be overstated in this series because Philadelphia is not a great defensive team. They were not a great defensive team against Brooklyn. They did shut them down from the three-point line as the series went along, but Toronto has a lot of different ways they can score. They like to go inside with the basketball. They can find ways to put points up there on the board. Philadelphia is going to have to do the same, but against a very, very good defensive team. Now, that being said, Philadelphia does have some advantages on the glass, both offensively and defensively. So we'll see if they get some extra possessions, some second chance points, and things like that. Now, the difference between this series and the other series I just talked about is that I don't think Philadelphia steals a game in Toronto. I think this goes back to Philadelphia with Toronto up 2-0. So at that point, maybe then you'd want to take a look at the 76ers, get that balloon price for them already being down 2-1. If they win both games at home, it's 2-2 going to a best of three. At that point, you're sitting with a decent Philadelphia price. But I don't think that there's really a whole lot of value in taking Philadelphia before the series. I don't think games 1 and 2 are as ripe for the taking for them as they are for Boston. And if this is a 2-0 series, obviously Toronto then sitting in a very, very advantageous position. So that's the difference here. I think Toronto's home court advantage is a pretty big factor in the first two games of this series. Milwaukee obviously has it in theirs as well, but without Brogdon, anything could happen in those first two games. And also, I just think Boston's a better team than Philadelphia when Boston actually wants to play. Now that we've reached the playoffs, now that they're as healthy as they're going to be, Boston actually wants to play. So I think that they are a much more intriguing bet here in the Eastern Conference for the semifinals than the Sixers are. We move on to the Western Conference here where we're going to see Houston and Golden State. Golden State will find a way to win one of these last two games against the Clippers. Obviously, plenty of reasons to be concerned about the Warriors. The huge collapse in Game 2, flat effort here the last time out. There's something going on with this team. And a lot of people are probably going to look at it from an offensive standpoint. I'm going to look at it from a defensive standpoint because this is a Golden State team over the last few years that has simply dominated both offensively and defensively. They've not dominated defensively at all here this year. Middle of the pack in defensive rating. Yes, they can score, but Houston can too. And the big difference for Houston after that slow start that they got off to is that they started playing defense. They played excellent defense in the series against Utah. They played excellent defense down the stretch. And it also allows them some of those transitional opportunities on offense. They're a decent team in the half court, but they want to run in transition, get those open looks, don't let the defense get set. So we'll see what happens in this series. I think that you've got a Houston team here that wants to ugly this thing up. They want to muck up this series. They did it last year in the Western Conference Finals and actually had that 3-2 lead that they couldn't close out in the series. So obviously the difficult thing here is what do you do from a series price standpoint with the Rockets plus 230, Warriors minus 275? It's a challenge because it's hard to see Golden State losing Game 1 at home. On the other hand, Golden State having to spend a little bit more energy in their series against the Clippers than Houston did against Utah, despite that series being in altitude. So maybe Houston can steal Game 1, but I think you'd rather look at something more like to win the Western Conference or to win the NBA title as opposed to the series price here. Get a little bit more equity for your dollar, a little more bang for your buck, because if Houston did happen to win this series, they would be favored against whoever they played in the next round. Even if even with the fact that Denver and Portland would both have home court advantage on them, I still think Houston would be favored. So I think here you would look at Houston to win the West or win the NBA title with a little bit more equity and a little more value than to win this series. But they are very live in this series when it happens. And the Warriors, they just don't look the same. Maybe they flip that switch, but right now, Golden State just doesn't look the same. The Blazers are still awaiting their opponent. They'll find out potentially tonight if they play San Antonio or Denver. They'll be favored against San Antonio. They'll be an underdog to Denver. But even though I can't see the series prices here for this, I can tell you that I'd probably be interested in the Blazers either way. Love the way that they're playing basketball right now. Love the leadership from Damian Lillard. Not just nailing that stone-cold three to knock out Oklahoma State, but simply because in Game 4, when that series could have swung with a 2-2 tie, Lillard elevated all of his teammates. They got Aminu some more looks. They got different guys' looks. Harkless had some more looks. Obviously, McCollum gets his share. But Lillard was both a facilitator and a scorer in that series. And when he's doing both, the Blazers are very, very hard to beat. Now, obviously, if they play Denver, it's a very home-road dichotomy type of series. Both Portland and Denver very good at home, both about 500 teams on the road. But I still think that Portland, with the way that they're playing, with how well they play defensively, I think they are a pretty live dog in that series against Denver. I think they would take care of business against San Antonio as well. Denver really hasn't defended all that well in this series against the Spurs, who, they have two go-to scorers in DeRozan and Aldridge. But the fact that Denver's not defending well against those guys and then would take on, an elite point guard in the next round with Damian Lillard, that worries me a lot about Denver's situation. So I'll probably wind up liking Portland no matter the matchup. Certainly I'd like to see them play the Spurs because then I think we've got a little bit more advantageous of a situation. But even without that, I would look to take the plus money price on Portland when they open a dog against Denver or that favorite price when they take on San Antonio. And obviously we'll see who they wind up playing in that second round. But just to recap real quickly here, I think Boston's worth a look at plus 245. I don't see anything I really like in the Sixers and Raptors series. Maybe Raptors minus 250 if you do think that they'll open up the series 2-0, and they probably should. The Rockets, not a lot from a series price standpoint, but more for the Western Conference and for the NBA title. And I like the Blazers probably, price dependent, of course, taking on the Spurs or the Nuggets. I'm Adam Burke for Bang the Book.